of wanting to be out there as long as you can be out there and making it as lightweight as possible, which is what most people can relate to if anybody's ever traveled. You don't want to be carrying around a big heavy bag all the time either. So.
That's right, that's true. Now, what are some other cool technologies going on?
One of the problems we have is managing all the logistics. If you're going to be gone on a trip and you pack your car, that you're going to be doing, and you need to figure out where everything's going to be out there, say your motorhome, over the course of a couple of years, how are you going to find all that stuff?
What most people can relate to.
So what we're going to do is if you're going to be gone on a trip and you pack your car,
I mean, that actually makes sense because especially you take a look something like ISS, where you probably have thousands of equipment station, and how you keep track of all that.
And on space station, we don't sometimes. There are a number of items that we've lost on the space station, and we have to potentially fly a new one up. On the space station, you have the additive benefit of the crews changing every 6 months. So imagine if you were living in your house for 6 months, you put everything where you wanted it to go. Somebody else comes up 6 months later and moves it all on you. And then you come back again, and nobody knows where everything went.
Right.
So everything will have the equivalent of almost like a high-tech sticker that actually tracks every piece, and you'll have different types of readers. So you have readers that are in between modules, so you
somebody
can
else
track
comes
when
up
something
6 months
moves
later
from one module to another, and you'll have other readers that may be handheld,
and then you come
so
back
you can
again, and
scan
nobody
your
knows
storage
where
bags
everything
and
went.
figure out which bag is it exactly in. We're even looking at how do you make one of those scanners and put it on one of our flying robots.
Like spheres?
On spheres.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So we're actually going to test a mobile RFID reader where you actually attach it to the robot and let the robot figure out the inventory. It can go out and manage an inventory where everything is. The crew actually doesn't have to do that kind of mundane task. The robot can actually go off and do that. And in fact, our Space Technology Mission Director colleagues are starting the development on that robot that will follow on after Spheres, and its name is Astrobee.
One of the cool technologies that we've been watching closely is the additive manufacturing, our 3D printer. We have one on station now.
Yeah.
How's that coming along?
So talk about all these parts and pieces that you want, and you try to predict everything that would ever go wrong. Well, we're going to not think of some things. So one of the advantages of additive manufacturing, if we don't have a part, we can just order it up and have folks here on the ground design it digitally, email the file up, and then print out the part on orbit.
And how long is that process in terms of making a tool or making a piece of technology?
So on station, we've already printed over 20-some parts. And in fact, you can print several parts per day, whatever you want, just on a single printer.
Franklin.
Hey, Franklin, what's the code for Q's lab?
You know, I'm not quite sure, but try this. It usually works for me.
All right.
Up, up.
Not really directions.
Down, down.
Got it.
Left, right. Left,
All right. Yep.
BA. Select, start.
Mission complete.
This. It usually works for me.
All right.
Up, up.
Not really directions.
Down, down.
Got it.
Left, right. Left, right.
Yep.
BA. Select, start.
Mission.
Chris, that was a great segment. And then piece on RFIDs. I wish I had that technology in my house. If I could keep up with my phone and keys.
I like to keep all the toys that my son has. I mean, he's listening to toys all the time.
Yeah, they're under your feet.
That's true. Hey, Blair, you all right?
Complete.
Can you watch the movies with me?
He must have left the RFIDs.
I tell you what, let's continue on. I don't know what his deal is, but another cool piece of technology and adjacent, he's talking about the 3D printer. You had a chance to sit down with Nikki Werkheiser.
Yeah, Nikki was telling me about the technology that is up on the ISS and how this might be used in the future of space exploration going to Mars.
Hey, let's check it out.
Today we're at the Additive Manufacturing Lab at the Marshall Space Flight Center, and I'm talking with the 3D Printing in Space Project Manager, Nikki Werkheiser. How you doing, Nikki?
Hi, doing well, thanks.
Additive manufacturing, exactly what is it?
So additive manufacturing is actually the kind of formal term for 3D printing. Traditional manufacturing is subtractive. You have a material and you take away from it. Additive is any process really where you actually actually
that is up
build
on
the parts
ISS
that you're
at the
trying to
Marshall
create
Space Flight
layer by
Center.
layer.
And I'm
So
talking
it's
with
additive
the
instead of
3D printing in
subtractive.
space. 3D printing has been around for a long, long time. So why is it right now we're talking about doing 3D printing in space?
So 3D printing, you're correct, it's been on the ground for quite some time. But as you probably know, in space travel, we depend on flying every single thing from the ground to the space station, for example, that we might ever need. So our supply chain from the inception of the human space program has really been quite limited. But when we really start to think about exploring further out destinations like Mars or asteroids or the moon, that supply chain model really isn't feasible. We have to think about how we would respond in real time in a sustainable, affordable way if parts get lost or broken. If we're doing science, for example, just like in a lab on the ground, we have disposable hardware, sample containers and syringes, things like that, that right now we're completely dependent
to the space station, for example, that we might never feasible. We have to think about how we would respond in real time in a sustainable, affordable way if parts get lost or broken. If we're doing science, for example, just like in a lab on the ground, we have disposable hardware, sample containers and syringes to ground to the space station, for example, that we might never feasible.
The technology hurdles that you have to get over to make sure it works the same way in space as it does here on Earth.
Right, so those were actually our exact questions. As a matter of fact, it was back in 1999 that Ken Cooper here at Marshall Space Flight Center flew the first 3D printer on a parabolic flight
We have to think
how
about
it
how we
reacted
would
to
respond in real time
Since then,
in
the
a
company made it
sustainable,
space,
affordable
which we have a small business innovation research award with, and actually built the 3D printer that we've launched to space station now, has flown over 500 parabolas on those flights through NASA's Flight Opportunity Program. So from that, we've gotten some really good data. We've been able to see in microgravity the basic response when you're laying the layers and
we have a
performing
small
additive
business innovation
manufacturing.
research award
However, you
with
only
and
get
actually
the
built
20
the
to
3D
30
printer that we've launched to space station now.
on those
Has flown
flights.
over
So the
500
bottom line is
parabolas
that
on
the
those
space
flights through
station is
NASA's
actually
Flight
the
Opportunity
only
Program.
platform
So
we
from
have
that,
in
we've
the
gotten some
entire
really good
universe
data.
where we
We've been
can
able to
test
see
this
in
process out,
microgravity
the basic
the
print a
response
complete
here.
part in microgravity. And that's why the first printer that we just launched is
We have a small business innovation research
and we launched it on
with and actually built the 3D printer that we've launched to space station now. Has flown over 500 parabolas on those flights through NASA's Flight Opportunity Program. So from that, we've got some really good data. We've been able to see in
So the first printer that we're flying
in
is actually operating in the
and that's why the first
microgravity
printer that we
science
just
block box.
launched,
And that is because since this had never been done on space before, we did not have all of the data, like flammability and all the gassing of the heated extruded material that we're printing with. Since then, we've collected all that ground data and found that actually the results are promising. The next printer will actually operate outside of it and will have the next generation of space printer that is what we learned off of this printer. We've already learned a great deal. When you're designing something for a space flight, you actually need more automation than you have on the ground. Astronaut time is very valuable and limited, so you want to be able to automate. You also want to be able to control it remotely from the ground as much as possible. So you'll note, for example, that we have 2 large windows in the printer, and we'll have cameras aimed at those windows during the printing process. And we will be able to see in detail as the layers are being deposited how that process is unfolding. What's really exciting about this is we can actually email our 3D print files directly to the 3D printer from the ground to space station. So it sounds very kind of science fiction, but it's not. It's going to be science fact very soon.
Tea Earl Grey hot.
What material is being used in the production of the parts that are going to be made on the ISS?
Sure. So for our first printer, the technology demonstration, we're actually using ABS plastic, which is the same plastic. If you see here, this is a little piece of the filament. This is the same plastic that Legos are made out of, for example. Mm-hmm. The filament that we use is just like this, and to be quite honest, it looks almost just like your weed eater spool. Mm-hmm. We're actually looking at the next generation printer as well for even more materials, stronger plastics, for example.
We talk about plastics, but when we get down to the point where we're talking about tools that break, what is the future for using metals in space and building those type of tools?
Right, so at NASA we actually have what we call the In-Space Manufacturing Initiative. And that initiative actually is composed of a roadmap or a vision of all the integrated suite of capabilities that we'll really ultimately need for exploration missions that we want to test on Space Station. We also want to do things, as you mentioned, like printing with metals in space, printing electronics as well. We actually, last year, NASA released a small business and innovation research proposal for a recycler on how to take that 3D printed part and turn it back into usable feedstock.
Nikki, what are the goals of this technology demonstration on the ISS?
So for the technology demonstration, it really has two phases. And the very first phase is specifically just to answer the question, does the additive manufacturing or 3D printing process work in microgravity the same way it does on the ground? So for the first phase, we'll actually be printing a lot of parts that may not look super exciting to the layman, but are very exciting to us. We'll have coupons. So we'll have things that look like this. This is a tensile specimen. We'll be doing things like compression and flexure and torque. For those parts, we'll be watching from the ground as the parts are printed through the cameras live. So we'll be able to a lot of information and data we'll be able to see immediately. However, to really determine that, we'll be flying those very first parts, those coupons, we'll be flying those back to the ground. And we have printed those same parts on the flight unit before we launched it. So we'll be doing some detailed engineering analysis and testing to compare those parts. Once we have established that the 3D printing process does work the same in microgravity as it does on the ground, we have a second phase. And how I like to think of that is the first phase really focuses on the printer and the printing process. In the second phase, we actually turn our attention more to the parts that we're printing. So utilization parts, we have a broad range, and we're developing a utilization catalog. You can have things like sample containers, small hand tools, replacement parts for exercise equipment or medical tools. There's just a plethora of different areas and categories we're looking into. But the thing there is to learn how to design these parts and build them in microgravity and to create kind of a certification process. We've never actually made the parts we need in space. We've launched everything from the ground, so we have a very well-known process for how we handle things like safety and flight requirements. So it's kind of fun to start thinking how we would certify a part that we actually built on Space Station. So those are the things we'll be working in the second phase of the technology demonstration. One example, we had a payload on orbit, and you have to change filters out as a requirement every so often, and it was time for the filter exchange, and the filter cap was missing. It's a real simple little part. We were able to 3D print that on the ground in about 45 minutes. Of course, we didn't have the 3D printer on board when this happened, so they actually had to wait 6 months for the next supply ship before they could use that facility. Even though that wasn't a life-threatening example, it's one that has very real and meaningful implications to the science and to the daily operations on Space Station.
What's going to happen in the next generation of 3D printing in space?
Yes, so we're already working that, and everything that we learned from this technology demonstration, including what we've already learned from the design and the operations, getting it ready for flight, will feed into the next generation printer. The really exciting thing about the next generation is that it's going to be a commercial printer. It's called the Additive Manufacturing Facility, and it's being developed by the company Made in Space, and they're out in Silicon Valley. So it won't just be NASA or the government that has access to 3D printing parts in space. It will be available for use by industry and academia, small businesses, large businesses that are interested in making something in space. So I think it's very exciting to think about kind of opening that door and opening the door to the space station and able to manufacture parts in space to more people than just directly NASA.
This technology is awesome. And I got to tell you guys, in light of all the technology that we've seen in the show today, I've got something a little special that I've worked up with the help of our good friend Jarvis. We're going to talk to Deanne Bell. Hi.
Resources, and our website challenges students to create 3D modeled inventions for space. The program is an American Society of Mechanical Engineers Foundation program in technical partnership with NASA, and it's really exciting. Our first challenge launched with the first zero-gravity 3D printer that went to space, and that's not the first and only challenge. We have many more challenges in the pipe, and we're constantly developing new challenges and new curriculum to really connect the excitement of space exploration and space research with the excitement of creating a 3D model and turning your idea into a 3D modeled reality.
Recently, you announced the winner for your first Future Engineers Challenge. What did that first challenge involve?
The first challenge, we challenged students to create a space tool for astronauts. And we had so many different submissions from all corners of the country. And ultimately, we chose 10 semifinalists in each age group. We had 2 age groups, under 13 and over 13, that are enrolled in a K-12 school. And our winner in the juniors age group is named Sydney Vernon, and she designed a space planter to grow a seedling in space. Our winner of our teen division, his name is Robert Hillen, based in Enterprise, Alabama, and he designed something called the MPMT. It's the